She thought she had it all under control, thought she was careful, thought she was too smart to get caught, but she was wrong, because I knew. I had known for weeks, maybe even months, but instead of anger, instead of confrontation, instead of giving her the satisfaction of a fight, I decided to do something better, something worse, something she would never see coming, because I wasn't going to scream or demand explanations. I wasn't going to beg or ask why. I wasn't going to give her the chance to cry and twist the story into something that made her look like the victim. No, I was going to let her think she was winning, let her think she was getting away with it, let her feel safe while I slowly, carefully, methodically destroyed her entire life, piece by piece, without ever laying a finger on her, because revenge isn't about rage, it's about patience, and I had all the time in the world to watch her lose everything. The first thing I did was start planting the seeds of doubt, nothing too obvious, nothing that would tip her off, just small, well-placed comments to the right people, a subtle shift in the way I spoke about her when we were with friends, a casual mention that she had seemed distracted lately, that she had been acting strange, that I was worried about her, and at first, no one thought much of it, just normal husband talk, just the usual concerns of someone in a long-term relationship, but over time, it started working. People started noticing things they hadn't before, started watching her more closely, started questioning the little inconsistencies in her stories, the time she had canceled plans, the excuses that didn't quite add up, and she had no idea, no clue that the people she trusted were starting to pull away, starting to see her differently, starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be. Then I moved on to the money, careful, calculated adjustments to our accounts, slow enough that she wouldn't notice at first, a little less here, a missing transaction there, a card that suddenly needed to be replaced, small inconveniences that seemed like nothing until they started piling up, and then, one day, when she went to make a purchase, something important, something she actually needed, she would get declined, she would try again, confused, frustrated, and when she checked the balance, she would see it, the slow, steady drain of everything she thought she had, and the best part? I wouldn't have to do a thing, because she would blame the bank, the system, a mistake. She would panic, she would try to fix it, and she wouldn't even think to suspect that it was me, that I had been watching her spend money on secret dates, on gifts for a man who wasn't me, that I had been quietly making sure she would have nothing left by the time I was done. But my favorite part, the part one had been waiting for, the moment I knew would break her completely, was at work, because her career was everything to her. The one thing she had built for herself, the one thing she was proud of, the one thing that made her feel independent, and I knew exactly how to take it away. Not by making a scene, not by calling her out, not by exposing her, yet, but by making her look unreliable, by planting just enough doubt in the minds of the people who decided her future, by subtly questioning her commitment, her focus, her integrity, small things, quiet things, things that seemed like nothing until one day, she walked into work and realized that something had changed, that her coworkers weren't looking at her the same way, that conversations went silent when she walked into the room, that she was suddenly being left out of important meetings, that she was no longer the rising star, no longer the trusted employee, no longer safe, and she would panic. Of course she would panic, because she wouldn't understand what was happening, wouldn't see the pattern, wouldn't know why everything was falling apart around her, and she would come home frustrated, upset, looking for comfort, looking for reassurance, looking for a reason, and I would be there, patient, supportive, pretending I had no idea what was going on, pretending to care, pretending to love her while I watched her entire world start to crumble from the inside out. And she still had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings, that I was the reason her friends were suddenly distant, that I was the reason her bank account was emptying, that I was the reason her career was slipping through her fingers, and I would let it continue, let it escalate, let her sink further and further into her own destruction, because she thought she was untouchable, thought she could lie to me, thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. But she was wrong. So wrong, because I wasn't just going to ruin her. I was going to make sure she never even saw it coming, and by the time she finally did, by the time she realized that everything around her was burning to the ground, it would be too late, because I wouldn't be the one standing in the fire, she would. She still had no idea, still walked around with that same confidence, that same false security, that same belief that she was in control, that she was untouchable, that she could live this double life without consequences. But I saw the first cracks forming, the tiny fractures in her perfect world, the little moments where she hesitated, where she second-guessed herself, where something felt off but she couldn't quite put her finger on why. And that was exactly what I wanted, for her to feel it, creeping in, for her to sense that something was wrong but not understand what, for her to start losing her grip without knowing what she was even fighting against. And I watched, waited, made small adjustments, just enough to make her question herself, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt, just enough to make her life feel like it was slowly, painfully slipping out of her hands. Her friends were the first to change, not all at once, not enough for her to immediately notice, just small shifts, subtle things, a missed call here, a canceled plan there, the slight hesitation in their voices when they talked to her, like they weren't sure they trusted her anymore, like they weren't sure they believed the things she said. And I made sure she noticed, made sure she felt it, made sure she saw the way they started pulling away but didn't understand why, because that was the point, that was the game. Not to take everything at once, not to rip the rug out from under her, but to make it slow, to make it agonizing, to make her feel like she was the problem but didn't know how to fix it. And I watched as she sent text after text, as she left voicemails, as she tried to hold on to the friendships she didn't even realize were already gone. Then came the money, the slow realization that her finances weren't what she thought they were, that her account balance wasn't matching what she expected, that payments were bouncing, that she was missing money she swore had been there. And I saw the confusion on her face, the flicker of panic in her eyes when her card got declined for the first time, the way she frantically checked her banking app, the way her fingers gripped the phone tighter as she stared at the numbers that didn't make sense, and she blamed the bank. Of course she did. She called them, argued with them, demanded to know where her money had gone, and I could only imagine the frustration, the helplessness, the rage that built inside her when they told her that everything looked normal on their end, that there were no mistakes, that the transactions were legitimate, that the problem was her, and she couldn't understand it, couldn't make sense of it, because as far as she knew, she hadn't done anything wrong. But that was the beauty of it, that was the design, because she was right, she hadn't, I had. And then, just when she was reeling, just when she was trying to process the fact that her friends were slipping away, just when she was starting to doubt her own memory, just when she was trying to figure out what was happening with her money, I went for the thing she cared about the most, her career. She had spent years building it, climbing the ladder, proving herself, being the woman everyone respected, the woman everyone relied on, the woman everyone trusted, and I knew that if I wanted to truly break her, I had to take that from her too, had to make sure she wasn't just alone and struggling, but powerless. And so I planted the doubt, the whispers, the quiet little nudges in the right ears, the ones that mattered, the ones that could shift the way people saw her. And I was careful, so careful, because this wasn't about some big scandal, wasn't about some dramatic revelation. This was about undermining her, making her seem unreliable, making her seem distracted, making her fail in ways she couldn't explain. And it started slowly, with a mistake on a project she swore she hadn't made, an email she didn't remember sending, a deadline she had always been on top of but somehow missed. And I saw it, saw the way her boss started looking at her differently, saw the way meetings she used to lead were suddenly given to someone else, saw the way she was losing ground without even realizing it. And when she finally started to notice, when she finally felt the shift, when she finally sat across from me at dinner, stirring her drink with a distant look in her eyes, a crease in her forehead, a nervous twitch in her fingers, I played my part perfectly, tilting my head, pretending to be concerned, pretending to be the caring husband, pretending I didn't already know what she was about to say. And when she finally let out a small sigh, when she finally looked up at me, her voice softer, uncertain, and said, "I feel like everything's falling apart lately," I smiled, reached across the table, took her hand in mine, gave her my best supportive look, and said, "Maybe it's just in your head." And I watched as she believed it. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and she didn't even realize how deep the cracks ran yet, didn't understand that every little thing that had been going wrong wasn't just coincidence, wasn't just bad luck, wasn't just a rough patch. It was me, it was all me, carefully, deliberately, destroying her life from the inside out, and I could see it in the way she moved now, in the way she carried herself, shoulders tense, jaw tight, eyes darting around like she was waiting for something else to go wrong, like she was bracing for another failure, another disappointment, another moment where she would feel completely, utterly out of control, because that was what I was doing to her, making her question everything, doubt everything, lose trust in everything, including herself, and it was beautiful, so perfectly, deliciously satisfying to watch her scramble, to watch her try to hold on to a life that was already slipping through her fingers. And the best part was that she still hadn't figured it out, still thought she was the one making mistakes, still thought she was the problem, still thought that if she just tried a little harder, just worked a little more, just fixed herself, everything would go back to normal. But it wouldn't, because there was no normal anymore, because the life she thought she had, the stability she thought she could rely on, was gone, and it was never coming back. She was trying to fight it, though, I could tell, trying to hold on, trying to pretend everything was fine, trying to convince herself that she wasn't losing control, but she was losing everything, and she knew it, even if she wouldn't admit it yet, even if she was still trying to push through the storm without realizing that she was the only one drowning. And I could see it in the way she reacted to even the smallest things now, the way her hands clenched into fists when her phone buzzed, the way she checked her banking app 3, 4, 5 times a day, as if the numbers would magically fix themselves, the way she hesitated before answering calls from work, as if she was afraid of what was waiting on the other end, and she should be, because the foundation she had built her life on was crumbling, and she had no idea how to stop it. She came home late that night, exhausted, drained, looking like she had spent the entire day fighting a battle she wasn't even sure she was losing. But I knew that she had felt it, that shift, that moment where reality started pressing down on her in a way she couldn't ignore anymore, because I had timed everything perfectly, had made sure that the people who once trusted her, once respected her, once saw her as untouchable, now saw her as unreliable, as unstable, as a liability, and I could imagine it, could picture the way her boss must have looked at her, the way her co-workers must have whispered, the way the walls were slowly closing in, and when she finally sat down across from me, rubbing at her temples, sighing, looking so utterly defeated, I almost felt bad for her, almost, but then I remembered the way she had smiled at her phone late at night, the way she had laughed for someone else, the way she had kissed me after spending the day with another man, and I felt nothing but satisfaction, because this was exactly what she deserved. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she muttered, voice quiet, weak, as if she was afraid of saying the words out loud, as if admitting them would make them more real, and I tilted my head, watching her, pretending to be concerned, pretending to care, pretending that I hadn't spent weeks, months, orchestrating her downfall, and I could see the frustration in her eyes, the desperation, the way she was searching for an answer she would never find. Because there was no answer, no easy solution, no way out, and I wanted to drag it out, wanted to let her stew in her own confusion, but I also wanted to see just how broken she was, so I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, lowering my voice just enough to make it feel intimate, like I was on her side, like I was her only safe place left, and I said, "Maybe you just need to take a step back, focus on yourself, clear your head." Her lips parted slightly, her brows knitting together, because she hadn't expected that, hadn't expected kindness, hadn't expected support, and I saw it then. The moment she realized how alone she felt, how little she had left, how everyone around her was slipping away, and I could tell she was holding back, could tell she wanted to tell me more, wanted to open up, wanted to lean on me, and it was almost laughable, because I was the one who had pushed her off the edge in the first place. But she had no idea, and that was what made it so perfect, because she still thought I was her husband, still thought I was on her side, still thought she had someone who cared about her, and I let her believe it, let her sit in that false comfort, let her think, just for a second, that she still had something solid to hold on to, because the deeper she fell into that illusion, the more painful it would be when I finally ripped it away. She was breaking. I could see it in the way she moved, in the way she spoke, in the way her voice cracked just slightly when she thought no one was listening, and I knew she was reaching her limit, knew she was grasping at anything, trying to make sense of the world that was crumbling around her, but nothing made sense to her anymore, because I had made sure of that. I had taken away her certainty, her security, her confidence. I had turned her own life against her. And she had no idea how, no idea why, no idea who to blame except herself. And that was the best part. That was the true punishment. Because if she had known it was me, if she had figured it out, then she could have fought back, could have tried to fix it, could have done something. But instead, she was lost in the dark, drowning, suffocating, slipping further and further into a life she didn't recognize. And the more she struggled, the deeper she sank. She was getting desperate now. I could feel it, the way she clung to me, the way she leaned into my touch, the way she sought out my reassurance, and it was almost pathetic, the way she looked at me with those pleading eyes, silently begging me to fix everything, to tell her it would all be okay, to save her. And I wanted to laugh because I was the reason she was here. I was the reason her life was in shambles. I was the reason she was unraveling piece by piece. And yet, here she was, sitting across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched, lips parted like she wanted to say something, like she wanted to admit that she was scared, that she was losing herself, that she felt like she was slipping away from reality. But she didn't. She just stared at the table, swallowing hard, jaw tight, and then, finally, she whispered, "I don't know what's happening to me." I let a pause stretch between us, let the silence wrap around her, let her sit in the weight of her own words, and then, with the softest voice, the most careful, deliberate concern, I said, "Maybe you should talk to someone." Her head snapped up, eyes wide, breath catching in her throat, because she hadn't expected that, hadn't expected me to suggest something so rational, so final, and I could see the panic bloom in her gaze, the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was right. Maybe there really was something wrong with her. Maybe she was really losing it, and I watched as she shook her head, too fast, too defensive, too much like someone who was afraid of what she might hear if she actually listened to herself, and she forced a laugh, weak, hollow, shaking her head again as she muttered, "No, no, I'm just stressed, it's just work, it's just bad timing, it's just—" But she didn't finish, because there was nothing else to say, because she could hear how weak her own excuses sounded, because she knew deep down that this wasn't just stress, that this wasn't just a rough patch, that something was wrong, that she wasn't in control anymore. And I watched, fascinated, as she swallowed hard, as she forced herself to breathe, as she clenched her hands into fists beneath the table, as if grounding herself, as if trying to pull herself back together. But it wouldn't work, because the pieces no longer fit, because I had shattered her in a way that couldn't be undone. I wanted to see just how far she had fallen, how much she had changed without even realizing it. So I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers, felt the way she tensed beneath my touch, and I asked, "Are you sure? Because I just want to help." And that was it. That was the moment she almost broke completely, because I saw it, the flash of emotion behind her eyes, the way her breath shuddered, the way her lips parted like she was about to confess something, something real, something raw, something she hadn't even admitted to herself yet. But then she blinked, and it was gone, buried, hidden, locked away where she thought I couldn't reach it, and she nodded quickly, pulling her hand away, rubbing at her temple, muttering, "I just need sleep, that's all. I just need to clear my head." And I nodded, pretending to understand, pretending to believe her, pretending that I wasn't the one keeping her awake at night, that I wasn't the reason she couldn't clear her head, that I wasn't the reason she was unraveling from the inside out, because she still thought she had a say in this, still thought she had control, still thought she could fix herself, and I let her believe it, let her cling to that last fragile piece of hope, because I knew it wouldn't last, knew that the next step would destroy her completely, and I couldn't wait to watch her finally realize that she was completely, utterly ruined. She woke up restless again, tossing, turning, sighing into the darkness like the weight of everything pressing down on her wouldn't let her sleep, and I could hear it, hear the way her breath stuttered, the way her fingers clenched the sheets, the way she shifted over and over like she was trying to outrun the thoughts in her own head, and I smiled, staring up at the ceiling, knowing she was starting to understand, starting to feel the pressure of something she couldn't escape, starting to realize that no matter what she did, nothing was getting better, that her life was only getting worse, that she was slipping, falling, sinking into something she didn't have the strength to climb out of, and I wondered how long it would take before she finally broke, before she finally stopped pretending, before she finally admitted that she wasn't okay. But I wasn't going to rush it, wasn't going to push her, wasn't going to force it, because she had to reach that moment on her own, had to sit in the silence, had to let the thoughts eat away at her, had to drown in the chaos I had created. And when she finally exhaled, slow and shaky, when she finally pulled the blanket over her shoulders like it might protect her, I turned onto my side, watching her, waiting, letting the seconds stretch until I finally whispered, "You okay?" She tensed immediately, shoulders locking up, body stiffening, because she wasn't expecting me to be awake, wasn't expecting to have to answer, wasn't ready to put the thoughts into words, and I saw it, the hesitation, the way she swallowed hard, the way her lips parted like she wanted to lie but didn't know how, like she was too exhausted, too drained, too done to even bother, and finally, after what felt like forever, she whispered, "I don't know." I kept my expression soft, careful, concerned, played the part of the supportive husband, the one who cared, the one who just wanted her to be okay, and I reached out, tracing my fingers over her arm, feeling the way she tensed at the touch before forcing herself to relax, and I let out a slow breath, measured, gentle, controlled, and I asked, "Talk to me." She exhaled sharply, like she didn't want to, like she didn't even know where to start, like she was afraid that if she said the words out loud, they would become real, and for a moment, I thought she might shut down, thought she might roll over, thought she might pull away and let the silence swallow her again. But then, finally, she whispered, "I feel like my whole life is falling apart." And there it was, the confession, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment she admitted that she was losing everything. I tightened my fingers around her wrist, just slightly, just enough for her to feel it, just enough to ground her in that reality, and I kept my voice calm, steady, perfectly measured, and I said, "Why do you think that?" She let out a short, bitter laugh, the kind that wasn't really a laugh at all, the kind that was sharp, hollow, broken, and she shook her head against the pillow, muttering, "I don't even know anymore. Nothing makes sense." And that was exactly what I wanted to hear, because she wasn't questioning just one thing anymore, wasn't trying to fix just one problem, wasn't trying to figure out just one mistake. She was doubting everything, every part of her life, every decision she had made, every step that had led her here, and she didn't even realize that I had orchestrated every second of it, that I had pulled every string, that I had been the one twisting the world around her until she didn't recognize it anymore. She sighed again, a deep, exhausted sound, and I could see it, the way she was sinking, the way her body curled into itself, the way she was giving in to the weight of everything pressing down on her. And I knew she wasn't going to fight anymore, knew she had reached the point where she just wanted someone to save her, and she thought that person was me. I almost laughed. Instead, I reached up, brushing my fingers over her cheek, tilting her chin slightly, forcing her to look at me, and I whispered, "You know I'll always be here for you, right?" Her breath hitched, and then she nodded, slow, defeated, like she believed it, like she needed to believe it, like she had no choice but to trust me, because she didn't have anyone else, because everyone else had pulled away, because I had taken everyone else from her, and now I was all she had left. Exactly how I wanted it. She didn't even realize it yet, didn't fully understand that she was already trapped, that there was nowhere left to run, no one left to turn to, that every single person who had once been on her side had slowly, quietly, turned away from her, because I had made sure of it, had spent weeks, months, making sure that when she finally reached this point, when she finally felt like her life was slipping away, there would be no safety net, no friend to confide in, no family member to comfort her, no job to throw herself into, nothing but the wreckage of everything she had once thought was solid. And I watched her sit at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the screen of her phone, scrolling through messages that were either non-existent or painfully short, watching as she typed and deleted texts she would never send, as if she was trying to figure out how to fix something that was already beyond repair. And it was fascinating, watching her come to terms with it, watching her realize that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, but still not knowing exactly what or why. because that was the beauty of it. That was what made this perfect. The fact that she still hadn't put the pieces together, still didn't know that it had been me all along. She set her phone down, rubbing at her temples, exhaling like she could physically push the stress out of her body. But it didn't work, because the stress wasn't going away. It was getting worse, building, growing into something bigger than her, something she couldn't manage, something she had no control over, and I could see it, could see the panic starting to creep in, the fear that maybe this wasn't just a bad week, that maybe this wasn't just bad luck, that maybe something much bigger was happening, something she couldn't stop. And that's when she finally turned to me, finally looked at me with those tired, desperate eyes, and whispered, "Do you think I did something wrong?" And it was almost funny, almost pathetic, how she was asking me, how she was looking for validation from the one person she should have feared the most, the one person who had spent every second of the last few months carefully, deliberately pulling her life apart piece by piece. And I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to watch her face when she finally understood, but not yet, because she wasn't ready, because she hadn't suffered enough, because there was still more to lose. So instead, I reached across the table, took her hand in mine, squeezed just gently enough to make her believe it, and I said, "Of course not, baby. You're just going through a tough time. You're just stressed. It'll pass." And she wanted to believe me, God. She wanted to believe me so badly, wanted to think that all of this was just some rough patch, that things would get better, that her friends would stop ignoring her, that her job would stabilize, that her finances would magically fix themselves. But she wasn't stupid, not entirely, and I saw it in the way her fingers curled against the table, in the way her jaw tightened, in the way she was forcing herself to accept a lie she didn't quite believe, because, deep down, somewhere beneath the confusion and the exhaustion and the slow, creeping dread, she knew. She knew this wasn't just stress, wasn't just bad timing, wasn't just some unfortunate coincidence. She knew that something had changed, that her life had taken a sharp turn down a road she didn't recognize, but she didn't know how to explain it, didn't know where to start, didn't know who to blame. So she just nodded, slow, distracted, pulling her hand back, pressing her fingers to her lips, like she was holding something in, and I knew that she was unraveling, that she was fighting a battle she didn't even understand, and I couldn't wait to watch her lose. That night, she barely spoke to me, barely looked at me, barely acknowledged my presence at all, because she was too busy thinking, too busy searching for answers she would never find, too busy trying to connect dots that didn't exist. And when she finally crawled into bed beside me, when she finally exhaled into the darkness, when she finally let out that soft, broken, defeated sigh, I knew she was starting to give up, starting to accept the fact that her life was falling apart, that she was losing everything, and that was exactly what I wanted, because she wasn't fighting anymore, wasn't trying to fix things, wasn't looking for solutions, she was just tired, just done. And when I reached for her, when I pulled her against me, when I pressed a kiss to her temple, she didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't resist, because I was the only thing she had left, because she was completely, utterly alone. Exactly how I planned it. She was slipping further, deeper, and I could see it in every little thing she did. The way she hesitated before answering the phone like she was afraid of what she'd hear. The way she checked her bank account over and over again like the numbers would magically change. The way she stared at her reflection longer in the mornings, like she was looking for the woman she used to be, the one who had everything, the one who was secure, the one who was in control. But that woman didn't exist anymore. And she was starting to realize it, starting to feel it, starting to panic because nothing made sense to her anymore. Nothing was working, nothing was stable, and she didn't know why, didn't know how it had all unraveled so fast. And the beauty of it was that she still thought she was in control, still thought that if she just tried hard enough, if she just pushed through, things would get better. But they wouldn't, because I wouldn't let them, because she wasn't just having a bad week, wasn't just dealing with bad luck, wasn't just in a rough patch, she was losing everything, and she didn't even know that I was the one taking it all away from her piece by piece, moment by moment, until there was nothing left. She tried, though, I had to give her that. She tried to fix things, tried to salvage what was left, tried to pretend that she wasn't standing in the middle of her own personal disaster. But she was, and no matter what she did, No matter how hard she fought, she was only sinking deeper, and I could see it killing her. See the way her shoulders stayed tense even when she was home. See the way she jumped every time her phone rang. See the way she opened her mouth to tell me something and then stopped, like she didn't even trust her own words anymore, like she was starting to wonder if she was the problem, and that was exactly what I wanted, because she was supposed to feel this way. She was supposed to feel trapped, supposed to feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way down except to fall, and I wasn't going to save her, wasn't going to offer her a hand, wasn't going to pull her back, because she had made her choices, and now she was going to live with them. That morning, I watched her check her email with a look of pure dread, her hands gripping her phone so tight I thought she might crack the screen, because she was waiting for something bad, waiting for another problem, another issue, another piece of her life to break beneath her feet, because that was what I had trained her to expect. And when she finally saw what she was looking for, when her breath hitched, when her eyes widened in shock, I knew it was exactly what I had planned, exactly what I had set up, exactly what she deserved, and she didn't even know I was watching her, didn't even know that I was the reason she was crumbling, didn't even suspect that I was the one who had sent the anonymous email to her boss, subtly pointing out discrepancies in her work, inconsistencies in her reports, things she had never actually done but now had to answer for, and I could see it, see the panic rip through her as she read the words, as she tried to figure out where it had come from, who had said it, how this had happened. But it was too late, far too late, because now she was under review. Now she was on thin ice. Now her job wasn't safe, and she knew it. She barely spoke to me that day, barely looked at me, barely even existed in the same space as me, because she was spiraling, because she was trying to hold everything together and failing, because she was breaking apart in slow motion, and I let her sit in the silence, let her suffer through the weight of her own mistakes, let her try to find a way out of a situation that was already set in stone. And when she finally exhaled, when she finally closed her eyes and whispered, "I don't know what to do," I wanted to laugh, wanted to lean in and whisper the truth, wanted to see the look on her face when she finally understood. But not yet, because there was still one last thing left to take. That night, she barely touched her dinner, barely spoke, barely existed, and I could feel it. Feel the way she was starting to break completely, feel the way she was starting to accept that this wasn't just bad luck, this wasn't just a rough patch, this was something worse. And when she finally crawled into bed beside me, when she finally exhaled into the darkness, when she finally let herself fall into exhaustion, I knew that tomorrow, when everything finally collapsed, when she lost the last thing she had left, she wouldn't be able to fight anymore. Because I had already won. She woke up to it, to the message, to the reality that everything she had been desperately trying to hold together had finally, completely, fallen apart, and I watched from the kitchen as she stood there in the hallway, phone clutched in her trembling hands, eyes scanning the words over and over like they might change, like she might wake up from this nightmare and find out that everything was fine, but nothing was fine, nothing would ever be fine again, and I could see it, could see the exact moment she understood, the exact moment it finally sank in that she had lost, that she had nothing left, that everything had slipped through her fingers and there was no one to blame but herself. And the best part was that she still had no idea, still had no clue that it was me, that I had done this to her, that I had spent months carefully pulling every string, shifting every piece, destroying every illusion she had built for herself until she was standing in nothing but the ruins, and I wanted to let her sit in it, wanted to let her drown in the weight of it. So I just kept sipping my coffee, pretending I wasn't watching, pretending I wasn't reveling in every second of her downfall. Her breath hitched, sharp and broken, a quiet, shattered sound that barely made it past her lips, and I knew she was trying to hold it together, trying not to fall apart, trying to figure out what to do next, but she had nothing left, no one left, because I had taken it all, had made sure that when this moment came, when everything finally collapsed, she would be completely, utterly alone. And I saw the way she swallowed hard, the way she blinked too fast, the way her fingers clenched around the phone like it was the only thing grounding her, and then, after what felt like forever, she finally turned to me, her voice shaking, weak, defeated, and whispered, "I lost my job." I let a pause stretch between us, just long enough for her to feel the weight of it, just long enough for her to hear the words again, echoing in her own head, and then I set my mug down, leaned back in my chair, kept my voice calm, measured, completely neutral, and said, "I'm sorry, baby. That must be really hard." And she flinched, like the softness of my words hurt more than anger ever could, like she wanted me to yell, to be furious, to react, to do something. But I wouldn't, I couldn't, because I needed her to feel it, needed her to sit in it, needed her to know that this wasn't something she could fix, wasn't something she could run from, wasn't something that had happened by accident. This was the end. This was her punishment. This was the moment she had to live with the consequences of her own betrayal, and I saw it. Saw the way her breathing turned uneven. Saw the way her whole body shook. Saw the way she pressed a hand to her forehead like she was trying to steady herself, and for a second, just a second, I thought she might finally break completely, might finally fall apart in front of me, might finally admit that she was lost, that she had nothing left, that she needed me. But then she did something unexpected, something pathetic, something that almost made me laugh. She tried to pretend she was okay. "I'll figure something out," she whispered, forcing the words out like they weren't choking her, like they weren't killing her, like she still had options, still had a way forward, still had some kind of plan. But she didn't, and we both knew it, and I could see the lie in her eyes, could see the desperation, the panic, the absolute fear of what came next, because for the first time in her life, she had no backup plan, no safety net, no easy way out. And when she realized I wasn't going to comfort her, wasn't going to fix it for her, wasn't going to save her, she finally broke. The first tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it, a silent, helpless thing that made her suck in a sharp breath, like she was ashamed of it, like she didn't want me to see, didn't want me to know how much this was destroying her. But it was too late to hide, too late to pretend, too late for anything. And when the second tear came, when her shoulders slumped, when she let out the softest, most broken little sob, I knew that this was it, that she was done, that there was nothing left inside her except the loss, the emptiness, the pain. And I let her sit in it, let her drown in it, let her feel it in every inch of her body, because this was what she deserved. And then, just when the silence had stretched too long, just when she was about to shatter completely, just when she looked like she might say something real, I leaned forward, my voice soft, careful, cruel, and I whispered, "I'll always be here for you, baby." And she nodded, small, pathetic, completely broken, because she had nothing left but me. She didn't leave the house for 2 days, barely moved, barely spoke, barely even looked at me unless she had to, because she was drowning in it now, completely consumed by the wreckage of her own life, lost in the chaos of everything she had taken for granted, slowly, methodically being ripped away. And I watched her fall apart in real time, watched her isolate herself, watched her sit on the couch and scroll through old messages, emails, job postings, anything that might give her a sense of hope. But there was nothing. I had made sure of that. I had made sure that every bridge was burned, that every opportunity was closed, that every single person who had once cared about her now saw her exactly as I wanted them to see her, as someone they couldn't trust, someone they didn't want in their lives anymore, someone who was already gone. And I knew she felt it, knew she was feeling the suffocating weight of true loneliness for the first time in her life, because even before this, even before she met me, she had never been alone. She had always had someone, always had options, always had a way out. But not this time. Not anymore, because I was the last thing she had left, and she knew it. She tried to fight it at first, tried to act like she was still looking for a way to fix things, like she was still strong, still capable, still in control of her own life. But that illusion was cracking fast, and I saw it in the way her hands shook when she picked up her phone, in the way her voice broke when she left a voicemail she knew wouldn't get a response, in the way she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, like she could push the tears back inside, like she could pretend that she wasn't completely falling apart. And the best part was that she still didn't suspect me, still didn't know that I had orchestrated every second of this downfall, that I had been the one behind every lost friendship, every missed opportunity, every financial problem, every moment of doubt and fear and absolute hopelessness. And that was what made it so perfect, because she thought this was her fault, thought she was just unlucky, thought she was just going through something she couldn't understand. And that meant she had no reason to blame me, no reason to push me away, no reason to do anything but cling to me tighter every single day. And she was. I could see it in the way she watched me now, in the way she reached for my hand absent-mindedly, in the way she leaned into my presence like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing completely, and I let her believe that I was the only good thing left in her life, that I was the only person who still cared, that I was the only one who would never leave her, because she needed to believe that she still had something. And the irony, the delicious irony, was that I wasn't her safety net, wasn't her protector, wasn't the one keeping her together. I was the one who had torn her apart in the first place, and she would never even know it. Then, on the third day, she broke. It was late, the house was quiet, she was sitting on the floor in the bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing, lost in whatever dark, spiraling thoughts had finally pulled her under, and I stood in the doorway, watching, waiting, knowing that this was it, that this was the moment I had been leading her to, and then, finally, her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper, barely even there, and she said, "I don't know who I am anymore." And I smiled, just a little, just enough to let myself enjoy it, because that was the moment I had been waiting for. That was the moment she finally let go. That was the moment she finally realized she wasn't the person she used to be, that the woman who had laughed behind my back, who had lied to my face, who had betrayed me without a second thought, was gone, and in her place was someone new, someone weaker, someone broken, someone who belonged to me now. And I stepped toward her, slow, careful, deliberate, then knelt in front of her, tilting her chin up, forcing her to look at me, and when she did, when I saw the absolute emptiness in her eyes, I knew I had won, knew she wasn't going anywhere, knew that she was finally, fully mine. And I stroked her cheek gently, voice soft, reassuring, like I was the only thing grounding her in reality, and I whispered, "That's okay, baby. I'll take care of you." And she nodded, because she had no other choice.